The Prince and the Hourglass Sea. The palace of Helioport rose like a salt-white wave above the blue bay, and on its lantern balcony stood Prince Lysander, broad-shouldered, long-limbed, the kind of beauty that made courtiers practice their smiles and polished shields. On this night the moon looked like a silver boat overturned in the sky, and below, the harbor chimed with rigging and soft laughter. "Your Highness," said his captain, "dawn comes quick. We put off for Thalassa at first light." Lysander didn't answer at once. He was listening to the hush between the gulls' cries, a hush that felt, watched. Then the air rippled like heated glass. A woman stepped out of nothing as if a curtain had been lifted from the world. She was incandescent, dark hair braided with threads of starlight, skin with the faint warmth of sunset on pale marble. Time's perfume, rosemary, myrrh, rain on old stone, followed her. "I am Aioné," she said, voice calm as a pendulum. "Guardian of the long year." Her eyes, gold at the rim and midnight at the core, studied him. "You will cross my waters before you see your home again." "My home is beyond that cape," Lysander said lightly, though his heart tugged as if a tide had taken it. "The straight path is for clocks," Aioné replied. "Men earn their hours." She lifted a hand. An hourglass formed, its sand suspended mid-fall. "Keep this aboard. Do not turn it without cause. Time helps those who respect it." "Is this warning or blessing?" "Both." She stepped nearer, and the world smelled briefly of spring in old olive groves. "You will also meet my kin. Treat the seasons kindly, steal nothing from Kairos, bargain with the fates if you dare." "Will I see you again?" he asked. "For a prince who smiles like dawn?" "Inevitably." She touched his wrist, heat, then sudden cool. "Remember, the sea keeps receipts." The hourglass flashed, and was a simple glass bound in bronze. The goddess was gone. At sunrise, Lysander's flagship Dawnstar cut the water, oars bright with spray. The hourglass hung by the captain's wheel, sand holding itself as if stubborn. The crew joked about charms and pretty talismans. But the prince kept glancing at that trapped cascade of gold, feeling time watching, patient as a cat at a mouse hole. The island that eats yesterday. On the third day, they found an island that lay like a coin on blue velvet, low, green, docile. Fishermen waved from the beach. Women sang over nets. It smelled of bread and oranges. "We could rest a day," said Captain Myron. "Half a day," said Lysander, though the place felt too tidy, like a story told to children. They feasted. The bread tore with a sigh. Wine tasted of summer bells. A boy offered figs glazed with honey. "A gift from the sisters," he murmured. "What sisters?" "The three who mend," he said, and blinked as if the question had never been asked. By dusk, laughter had the lazy edges of forgetting. Mid-song, the quartermaster frowned. "Was our sail ever torn?" "It was," said a mate. "But when?" Memory slid like a fish from wet hands. Lysander stood, every reflex alert. He slipped the hourglass from its hook and tilted it a hair. Sand dropped with a sound like distant rain on clay roofs. The island stuttered. A child's lullaby rewound half a note, a torch unburned an inch. In that stammer, the glamour showed its seams. The fishermen were shadows stitched to masks. The fruit trees repeated themselves, branch by branch, as if copied onto thin parchment. "Cast off," Lysander said softly. "No torches. Row by breath." But the shoreline smiled wider, revealing pale, flat sand like a waiting tongue. From the palms stepped three women in dresses that shimmered between seasons, one in green spring, one in wheat gold, one in grape dark autumn. Their beauty was unbearable in different ways, fresh, fulfilled, fading, each a facet of a single radiance. "We are the Ori," said the one in gold. "We keep the island kindly, so wanderers may rest." "Rest, yes," said Lysander. "Not dissolve." The youngest laughed, sweet as first rain. "You tilted the glass? Clever." "We keep a toll," the eldest said gently. "A day for a day." "Then take mine," Lysander said. "Spare my men." The middle sister weighed him with eyes like harvest. Prince Charming's chivalry suits you. She touched the hourglass. The sand steadied. Go. Spend your days well. We'll collect later. They rode out under a sky that seemed to remember itself. Behind them the island smiled, then closed its mouth, and was merely green again. Kairos at the mast. A wind arrived like a decision, snapping the sails awake. A boy in the rigging laughed, then froze, eyes wide. Sir! Someone's... A man lounged on the yardarm as if it were a garden wall. Bronze curls, quick grin, a shoulder bare where a tiny wing tattoo gleamed. He wore a sash of threads that never lay the same way twice. Kairos, Lysander said, remembering Aioné's warning. In the fortunate flesh. The newcomer flipped and landed on the deck with a cat's surety. He was beautiful in the dangerous way of crossroads at midnight. You've met my sisters of season? Sweet girls. I'm the moment between beats. People waste me scandalously. What do you want? Oh, want is an hour's cousin. Let's say, admiration. He winked at the sailors, who were trying not to stare. And a small borrowing. From whom? From the man who carries an hourglass he doesn't fully understand. His smile sharpened. I like you, Prince. You have the posture of a yes. But you owe the seasons. Debts compound. If you've come to collect. Collect? Kairos laughed. I only ever open doors. The stepping is your poetry. He tapped the glass. Inside is not sand. It's choice ground to dust. Lysander felt the truth bite. And if I turn it? You'll buy a single perfect chance at the price of 10 imperfect ones. The god cocked his head. You're thinking of home. A woman at a window? Almond eyes, willow posture? Evadne, Lysander murmured. My betrothed. How charming! Tell her I'm the reason kisses sometimes happen exactly on time. Kairos twirled the rope's end, then went still, expression gone serious as a sealed letter. Storm. Clouds coiled up from the rim of the world. Lightning wrote rude arguments across the sky. The door opens, Kairos said. Choose. Reef the sails, Lysander called. Belts on. Pray later. The first gust hit like a thrown wall. The hourglass hummed in his palm. He didn't turn it yet. Kairos leaned close, lips at the prince's ear. Call my name when it truly matters. Then he vaulted the rail and became a white bird whipping into rain. A bargain with salt. The storm ground them down to splinters of fear and bruised knuckles. Waves lifted the world and set it down wrong. When dawn finally unstitched the thunder, the sea was heaving but sullen, like a drunk deciding to behave. Half the food spoiled. A mast was sprung. The crew looked at the prince with the frankness of men who hid nothing from death and therefore hid nothing from each other. We need harbor, said Myron. The only shore was a ring of black cliffs with a single gullet of a cove. They slid in on a breath of wind and dropped anchor in water green as old wine. On the strand stood a woman in a mantle the color of the deep. She was dazzling and terrible, her beauty like a knife polished by tides, cheekbones cut from shell, hair a dark cascade streaming with pearls. I am Thalassia, she said, daughter of the earliest surf. My lady, Lysander said, bowing. You rode my temper last night. I'm still counting. She drifted closer. Wet sand kissed her ankles and hissed. Your ship is a stitched-together promise. Your men smell of fear and orange peels. We need water and planks, said Myron, carefully neutral. Ask prettily. Her eyes slid to Lysander. The prince met that oceanic gaze. Grant us 2 days. In return I'll give you something I value. Careful, boy, she murmured. Salt loves the taste of vows. Not my word, he said. My song. He flushed, then lifted his chin. My mother taught me the old hymns. I'll sing them true for your shoals at dusk and dawn. The goddess considered, amusement brightening her like dawn on ripples. A prince who sings. That's nearly as rare as humility in a lighthouse. Give me the hymn of nets and moonfish. I know it. Of course you do, she said, pleased. 2 days. Leave an olive cup filled to the lip at the tide line. They repaired, they watered, they slept in shifts. At dusk Lysander sang. The melody lifted like gulls and settled like boats. Words salted with older words drifted out over black water. Thalassia listened, chin on her wrist, eyes soft. When the second dawn thinned, she let them go with a smile that promised both fondness and future debts. The sea keeps receipts, she echoed, and winked. Lysander felt Aioné's touch in the phrase and did not look back. The orchard of unpicked days. They didn't avoid the orchard so much as the orchard refused to avoid them. A cove opened, and there it was, bronze trees glossy with mirrors for leaves, fruit hanging like captured suns. Do not land, Lysander said. A single wind slid down and turned the ship by its chin. The current stalled, then nudged, and the dawn star kissed the sand before the anchors even dreamt of resisting. On the shingle stood a girl barefoot in a dress the color of pomegranate skin. She was astonishingly beautiful in a way that did not ask permission. When she looked at you, you felt remembered. Nimi, she said, bowing. Daughter of memory. Lysander inclined his head. My lady, you left a swan behind, she said, amused. Would you like to keep something else? I keep enough. She tilted her head at the orchard. Every fruit is a day you could relive perfectly. No flaws, no awkward pauses, no missed words. The bronze remembers better than blood. A sailor murmured, eyes wet. If I could have the day my child was born. Pick it, Nimi said kindly. But then you'll want the morning after, and the afternoon when he first laughed, and the evening you forgave your father. The tree will let you starve beautifully. Lysander stepped between his men and the grove. We'll take our imperfections with us. Wise prince. She looked at the hourglass. I won't let you carry our family's silverware. I'm only borrowing it. Everyone thinks that. Nimi's smile turned soft. Listen, then, when the hourglass hums like a hive, it means a memory is trying to escape becoming a lesson. Hold it still. How do I? Hold still yourself. She kissed his cheek, warm as bread. The shoreline blurred, the trees fogged, and when the mist cleared they were already a cable's length out, oars digging. Did we leave? Muttered a sailor, baffled. We remember to, Lysander said, and the men laughed shakily, the way people laugh after not tripping down stairs in the dark. Aioné in the rain. Night bled in from the rim of the world, and a weather with no wind wet the decks. The hourglass vibrated, a cat's purr under his palm. She's near, Myron said quietly, having learned to read his prince's silences. Aioné stepped out of the rain as if it had been keeping her shape for her. She was more terrible and more beautiful than before, wet hair laying like inked music across her shoulders, lashes jeweled with rain. You paid the seasons, she said, walking the length of the deck with unhurried grace. Men moved aside without being told. You bargained cleanly with salt. The fates let you go intact. Nimi didn't eat you alive. I'm impressed. I'm learning, Lysander said. You're remembering. She touched the hourglass. The rain peaked on its glass and ran off in strict, parallel veins. You haven't turned it. I don't want to buy a perfect moment at the cost of 10 flawed chances. Her smile warmed him down to childhood. Kairos will be offended. Kairos can complain at an opportune moment. Laughter flickered in her eyes, then dimmed. There is a bend in your road. You will be offered shelter by someone who loves you for what you're not yet, and by someone who loves you for what you'll never be. One will slow you. One will save you. How will I know which is which? You won't. That's why men have hearts. She turned her face toward the rain, let it beat on her lips, then looked at him the way a door looks at a key. When you reach the mirror straits, call me. The current there argues in several tenses. Stay, he said, surprised by the urgency in his own voice. I am staying, she whispered, hand over the hourglass, over his hand. Just not in ways you can count. Then she was only rain again, and the deck was crowded with breathing. The witch of slow lightning. On the 7th dawn after rain, they sighted a headland like a lion pacing. Smoke curled from a villa ringed by cypresses. Harbor, Myron said hopefully. A woman waited at the quay, her gown the blue-white of distant storms, her hair black with a copper streak like a lightning scar. Her beauty had a quiet artistry, the sort that rearranged rooms just by entering them. "I am Nerissa," she said. "I keep refuge for those the sea mistreats." "We've been merely scolded," Lysander said. "But we'll take bread and fresh rope." Bread came, and rope, and songs at table. Nerissa's servants moved like mirrors, anticipations of need. That night she walked the veranda with Lysander. "You carry a god's curiosity," she observed. "A goddess's," he corrected. "Then you know I'm a witch," she said lightly. "And that I mean you no harm if you are kind in my house." Lysander looked out over her pool where constellations lay like coins. "Kindness is cheap to promise, dear to keep." "Keep it then," she said. "Stay a month. Your men can heal, your wood can dry. I'll teach you how to read the bruises in a storm before they form." He almost said yes. Nerissa's refuge smelled of thyme and clean paper. In her presence the ache between his ribs, the missing hour, the mounting debts, quieted. She touched the hourglass. The sand tickled the glass, then hesitated. "You could turn this and buy us a perfect night. It would be worth 10 imperfect ones, I think. Perfect things are often museums of themselves," he said. "Beautiful, a little dead." She smiled, eyes shadowed. "Then let's live untidily." He should have stayed 1 night and gone. He stayed 6. On the 7th morning an old fisherman pressed a parcel into his hand. Inside, a child's ribbon, seawater stiff, and a cracked seashell. "My granddaughter's," the man murmured. "She waited on a cliff for a father whose ship turned back to rest here. He never came." Nerissa watched from the veranda, sorrow honest and bottomless. "I loved the man who stayed," she said when Lysander climbed the steps. "You are not him. Be him, and you will die here beautifully. Or leave and live? Or leave and live." She kissed his brow. Lightning flickered silently on the horizon, as if agreeing slowly. They put to sea on a wind that felt like forgiveness with a sore throat. The Mirror Straits. 2 headlands, 2 lighthouses, and between them a waterway bright as a polished sword. The current braided forward and back, reflections stacked like cards. The hourglass began to hum. "Call her," said Myron. "Aioné," Lysander whispered. "We're at the arguing water." She stood in the bow before he'd finished saying it. No ripple, no reveal. She was simply the most inevitable thing in the world. The crew dropped their eyes like men at worship without being told they were praying. "Do exactly as I say," Aioné murmured. She placed her palm on the hourglass. The sand arranged itself into a thin, glittering column. "On my word, turn once." Wind rose from 2 directions at once. The straits threw their own face back at the sea and told it to reconsider. In the gleam, Lysander saw 3 selves, one who had stayed with Nerissa, cardigan soft, older quickly, one who had eaten bronze fruit and smiled beautifully while starving, one who was this man now, leaner, scarred, stubborn as a reef. "No," Aioné said. He turned the glass. The column of sand spilled like a sword drawn, the perfect fraction too late to be expected. The straits hiccuped, the currents miscounted themselves. Dawnstar slid between versions of the same wave and came out whole. "Again," she said. He turned it back. The crew exhaled as one organism that had been underwater too long. The lighthouse lamps swung past like slow comets. When the sea calmed, Aioné rested both hands on the rail, face tilted to wind. For a moment she looked almost mortal, tired, pleased, worried in ordinary ways. "You could have kept the turn," Lysander said. "I don't own time," she answered. "I curate it." She studied him. "Your debt grows petals. I'll pay. You already are." She looked toward the west, where the air smelled faintly of wheat and home. "One more ask. When you reach your city, remember that clocks are not justice. Don't measure love in punctuality." "Stay," he said again, this time without surprise at the plea. "I am the staying," she said, and was wind, and was gone. The city of late applause. Helioport at last. White walls bluer than sky, towers shaped like sails reefed for celebration. Bells leapt. Banners laughed. On the quay stood Aioné in a gown the color of dawn heat. She was as lovely as the promise of rain after 3 wrong summers. Lysander came down the gangplank and swept her hand to his lips. "Forgive me," he said, voice rough with miles. "You're late," she said, eyes bright with unshed years. "And I am furious." Then she kissed him in front of everyone because some clock had finally admitted defeat. That night, after speeches, after bread with olives and tears, after the quiet moment in a courtyard where 2 people discover their old laughter still fits, Lysander stood alone on the balcony beneath a moon wearing out its edges. Aioné did not appear, but the hourglass warmed. He set it on the balustrade and watched the sand hang, stubborn, poised. Aioné slipped beside him, hair unpinned, the most beautiful mortal thing he'd ever seen. "You brought a toy from the gods." "A reminder," he said. "Of what?" "That a single perfect minute can cost too many almost perfect hours." She leaned into him. "Then let's be extravagant with almost." Below, the city sang. In the harbor, the dawn star rocked as if nodding. Out on the horizon a seam of lightning stitched but didn't close. Somewhere far behind the moon's pale coin, a goddess of the long year smiled like a keeper counting shells and finding none missing yet. The library at noon. Helioport held marvels, but none stranger than the library at noon, a square of radiant stone that only opened when the sun stood straight above the harbor needle. At that hour, shadow retreated to the margins like a scolded dog, and the bronze doors sighed. "Books that won't be read at night make me nervous," Myron muttered, but he came. Aioné came too, bright-eyed, a notebook hidden in her sleeve because she understood that some knowledge requires a place to live afterward. Inside, dust motes hung like held breath. Shelves curved in spirals, each rungied with manuscripts whose inks glinted as though not yet dry. At the central dais waited a woman robed in paleness, no color at all, just the idea of light. She was beautiful like geometry, absolute and serene. "Meridiana," she said, dipping her head. "High Keeper of Noon." "A sister of Aioné?" Lysander asked. "Cousin. I govern the hour that admits no disguise." She lifted a palm. A lion of sand rose roaring and then froze, each grain a captured roar. "Here truths hold still long enough to be weighed." Meridiana turned to Aioné. "You love him for who he tries to be, and for who he is when he forgets to try," Aioné answered, surprising herself. "Good," the keeper said, almost smiling. To Lysander, "You touched the hourglass at the straits. The world bent and did not break. Now choose, you may read the ledger of your remaining days, or the ledger of your remaining chances." "Not the same?" Lysander asked. "If clocks were just, we'd starve," Meridiana replied. He looked at Aioné. She squeezed his fingers. "Chances," he said. Pages turned themselves. Words crawled into shapes he could understand, a winter argument softened by laughter, a gift given at the wrong time that became right because it was honest, a storm seen from the inside and named before it struck. "No guarantees, doors." Meridiana nodded. "You grasped the coin." She set the sand lion loose. It padded to Lysander and curled, warm as sunlight on rugwool. "Leave a tithe," she murmured. "What kind?" "A certainty you can live without." He swallowed. "I forfeit the belief that my courage will always arrive on time." "Wise," she said, and looked pleased the way tutors get when a student moves the problem forward. Noon's light thickened, the doors sighed once more. Outside, shadows crept back like forgiven mischief. The map that drew itself. Back at the palace, Aioné unfurled her hidden notebook. Between its blank leaves, ink started walking, thin, curious lines that stitched coasts and capes the way a seamstress finds shape in fabric. "You've caught something," Lysander said, awed. "I listened harder than usual," she answered, not quite joking. "Meridiana's hall makes silence opinionated." By supper, the notebook had drawn a sea map none of their pilots owned, paths that were moods rather than routes. Good pride current, regret eddy, generosity wind. Along one edge, a little hourglass icon reappeared every few pages like a breadcrumb. Myron whistled. We could sail with less damage and more stories. Evadne traced a dotted curve labeled Borrowed Lightning. And perhaps fewer dead men who guess wrong. She lifted her gaze to Lysander. This doesn't tell us what will happen. It tells us where we might deserve to be. He kissed her knuckles. Meridiana charged us with chances. Let's spend them carefully. That night, while the city sang to the moon and bakers set dough for dawn, the sandlion dozed under their balcony. Every so often its mane sifted. A dream of dunes moved through it. From the garden path, a slim figure watched, someone with a gait like music interrupting itself, wearing a grin you could hear. Kairos, Evadne called softly. He came into the lamplight, beautiful like mischief in a good man's smile. You remember me. You occupy adjectives, she teased. True. He stroked the sandlion, who allowed it with the disdain of cats and gods. You've made a map that behaves. Dangerous. Help us read it, Lysander said. Kairos tilted his head. I'll do better. I'll point you somewhere you mustn't go, and in saying so, create the itch that sends you there. There's a thief abroad. He steals tomorrow's name, Evadne said. Epiros, Kairos replied. He pockets outcomes and sells them back to the desperate. If he visits your house, bolt your calendar. He flashed that devastating grin. And if you need me, call between the seconds. He snapped his fingers and was a cricket the city couldn't find. Evadne shut the notebook, pale but steady. If he steals from us, he'll find we count irregularly. Lysander kissed her hair and tasted resolve. A visitor with too many shadows. 3 evenings later, Helioport hosted a festival for sailors. Lanterns like constellations newly negotiated, tables laden with pink salt and green oil, fiddles doing agile work. Children threaded through the crowd with pockets full of almonds and ideas. A stranger arrived who cast 2 shadows. He was handsome in the way of mirrors that lie, symmetrical and a little bored. His cloak shimmered as if sewn from the hours he hadn't used. Epiros, whispered the sandlion, grains whispering like a desert in a bottle. The thief's eyes slid to the hourglass at Lysander's belt. You wear a family heirloom that isn't yours. Delicious. Lysander stepped between the man and the crowd. Return whatever you've taken from my city and leave. Epiros smiled with effortless cruelty. I've taken nothing yet. I'm here to buy. He looked at Evadne. Princess, sell me your worry about your first winter together. I'll keep it for you. Freed of anxiety, you'll glide through it like a swan. Evadne's chin rose. Worry makes me pack blankets. He laughed. And you, Prince? Sell me the possibility of failing a friend. You'll never doubt again. Doubt built my caution, Lysander said. Try the fish cakes instead, they're very good. The thief's mouth tightened. He stepped close enough for his quiet to sting. You can't keep your tomorrows and spend them. Let me hold them for a fee. Your fee? Choice. I collected in tidy fistfuls. The sandlion uncurled and put its great head between them. Epiros reached into its mane, fished out a single grain, and flipped it. The grain became a coin engraved with both sides at once. Duel me, he purred. Not with blades, my blood has clauses, but with clocks. If you win, I return what I've taken elsewhere. If I win, your hourglass clicks for me forever. Lysander felt the city listening. Tomorrow, at first light. Of course, Epiros said, already backing away with 2 shadows smiling. I'm good in mornings, I can rearrange. A lesson in late courage. They met on the marble steps of the harbor temple with half the city pretending not to watch. Meridiana stood in the crowd like a patient noon. Kairos perched on a bell rope like an invitation with legs. Aioné did not appear, but the air had that rosemary and old stone fragrance that meant she was paying attention. Epiros produced a case of clocks, water clock, candle clock, sand, spring, heart. We'll race 5 measures, he said. Best of them earns obedience. Obedience isn't a word I marry easily, Lysander said, and Evadne squeezed his shoulder. First, the water clock. The thief pinched the drip mid-fall with a smile. Lysander didn't fight physics. He widened the bowl so each drop had more sky to cross. The measure ended, a draw. Second, candle clock. Epiros whispered and the flame refused to shorten. Evadne held up a mirror and the candle burned twice as fast, burdened by its own reflection. Level again. Third, sand. The hourglass at Lysander's belt hummed. He didn't touch it. Instead he told a story, to the crowd, to himself, of a boy who learned when to wait because a storm taught him humility. People listened. In listening, they stretched the moment until the thief grew fidgety and the sand, insulted by inattention, finished falling in Epiros's glass before the story ended. Fourth, a spring clock, gears and patience. Myron wounded in the shape of a sea shanty. The gear teeth sang and, charmed, hurried. The thief scowled. Last, the heart. Epiros placed a hand to his chest. Mine beats on command. Lysander stepped forward and thought, not of victory, but of Evadne's hand steadying his worst days, of Aioné's warning about justice and clocks, of the men who had followed him into storms because they trusted the shape of his voice. His heart took that shape and beat to it. Meridiana raised her hand. Prince. Epiros bowed, face gracious and eyes murderous. I obey the letter, he said. Your letter was cunning. He spilled a pouch, coins fell that were once tomorrow promises, returned to the air, they popped like soap and became possibilities again. To seal the bargain, the thief added silkily. Allow me a kiss. On my hand, Evadne said, extending it like a queen. He kissed the air above her knuckles and flinched as if stung. Honesty had teeth. The price of a borrowed dawn. Victories collect interest. That night, Helioport dreamed in color. Lysander did not sleep. On the balcony, the hourglass grew warm. The sand lion murmured in its drift sleep. Soft steps. Aioné leaned on the balustrade beside him, hair loose, moon making lace of it. She was beautiful in a way that made the tides forget themselves. You won cleanly, she said, which is rarer than winning. And yet? He asked, hearing the seam in her tone. The seasons have sent their bill. She looked toward the hills, where orchards turned their leaves to listen. You borrowed an afternoon on their island, you paid with a day of your own. They prefer to collect when the debtor is happy. Take it from me, Lysander said immediately. They want it from both of you. Her glance slid to the sleeping city, Evadne within it like a lit window. A shared day is richer. Will she forget me for 24 hours? No. You'll both live a day that finds you, oddly, already yesterday. Aioné placed her hand over his. It will hurt like a song you can't finish. Is there another way? There are always other ways, she said softly. Some cost more than we think we can afford now, and less than we'll regret later. Advise me. I curate, she whispered, rueful. I do not rule. She tilted the hourglass. The sand paused, listening. If you accept, I'll braid the loss into your map so it shows up as a place to be kind in. He nodded. We accept. She kissed his temple, brief, almost human. You spend yourself with style, Prince. Then she was gone, leaving the rosemary of old courtyards and the certainty of morning. The day that hid. Dawn. Vendors laid out figs and salt fish. Children practiced being pirates with sticks that were very clearly swords. Evadne came to kiss Lysander's cheek, and missed his face as if the moment had quietly stepped aside. They spent the day together like people walking the same street on different sides. She spoke. A breeze carried her word away before it reached him. He reached. His fingers closed around a shape the world refused to recognize. At noon, Meridiana stood on the palace steps and did not intervene, which was intervention of a kind. By afternoon, Evadne was laughing at nothing with a fierce gentleness that made passers-by wipe their eyes. Lysander told a joke to the sand lion, and both tried to believe their own timing. At dusk, the city smelled of bread and orange peel. Evadne set 2 cups of wine on the balcony. The hourglass hummed, homesick for the moment it wasn't allowed to own. Beloved, Evadne said into the thinning air, speaking to the space that almost held him. I hope you are near enough to feel this. I'll keep a chair warm. I'll keep a story half finished. Come back to the end of our sentence. Somewhere else in the same house, Lysander said. I am coming. Night folded the city. The day returned to the seasons like a letter posted at the right box after wandering a while in the wrong bag. Somewhere, 3 beautiful sisters nodded, pleased, not unkind. Night and day consider a marriage. When the world turned its blue face toward dawn, 2 figures stood at the edge of the palace roof. One wore night the way swans wear water. The other was the first page of morning, golden and uncreased. Nyx, Lysander breathed. Hemera. Mother and daughter, Evadne guessed, bowing. Nyx's beauty was the sort that births myth from fear and comfort from myth, vast, jeweled, patient. Hemera's was a clarity that could be cruel without ever meaning to be. Time keeps wandering into my parlor, Nyx said, amused. You've made friends with clever relatives of mine. We owe the seasons, Hemera added, studying their faces as if they were recipes. You paid. That's rare. We try to spend true, Evadne said. Nyx approached the hourglass. Stars swam in its glass like minnows. Aioné would scold me for meddling, she murmured, not sounding worried. But I merely examine. What do you seek? Lysander asked. Bruises, Night said simply. Places where choices have bumped the furniture. She looked pleased. You bruise bravely. Hemera, impatient with sentiment, clapped her hands. Gift, she declared. Not reprieve. A lens. She touched Evadne's notebook. A new page bloomed, blank but louder than the others. This sheet shows where delay is kindness and where it is cowardice. You will fight about it and then learn. Evadne accepted the page the way one accepts weather, with grace and a plan. Thank you. Nyx wrapped them both in a darkness that smelled of figs and ink. Keep each other awake in the good ways, she said. Let sleep find you without resentment. By the time they breathed again, the roof was empty. Aioné's perfume lingered, tolerant of all this meddling because, perhaps, she had asked for it without asking. The Festival of Not Yet. Helioport invented a new holiday. Cities do this when they're in love with their own stories. They called it the Festival of Not Yet. Lanterns stayed unlit until the second song. Doors stayed open in case the right stranger arrived. Proposals waited until the sea bells rang thrice. Lysander and Evadne presided with a shared grin that said, We are making it up responsibly. Kairos darted from stall to stall, slipping kisses into pockets so that several youths ended the night surprised and honest. Meridiana judged the timing of toasts. The sandlion pretended to hate children and then let 3 of them nap against its flank. Toward midnight, Epiros appeared at the edge of the square with one shadow. He raised a cup toward the couple, acknowledging defeat like a gentleman of partly good breeding. Then he melted into a waltz and was gone. Evadne held up the special page Hemera had gifted. Tonight, delay was kindness, elderly feet kept up, apologies arrived before bitterness fermented. A girl decided not to leave, just yet, and because of that choice met the thought she'd been waiting for. At the high bell, Lysander set the hourglass on the fountain's rim. For the city, he said. He turned it a finger's width. The sand shivered, and for one breath everyone found their perfect place in the next measure of music. Then he righted it. The joy that followed was untidy and therefore true. Aioné did not appear, but above the harbor a veil of northern light stitched briefly, a seamstress signing her work. The knot at the end of the year. Winter arrived with the smell of iron and cinnamon. Helioport wore cloaks and became good at soups. Letters came from ports that had learned to sail with fewer regrets. The Moirai visited without ceremony, 3 profoundly beautiful women whose presence tidied conversations. Clotho spun in the courtyard, turning breath into thread. Lachesis measured the palace's shadow at noon and nodded. Atropos sat with Evadne over tea and cut the string of a bad habit without drawing blood. You owe nothing further for the hourless day, Lachesis said at last. But a separate knot awaits untying. What knot? Lysander asked. At the end of your year, Atropos said gently, there is a choice that can be trimmed to stop bleeding, or left to ache until it teaches. Evadne met the knife sister's eyes. We have learned to prefer aches that teach. Brave, Clothos sang, approving. Very inconvenient. The gods adore it. Can we see it? Lysander asked. Sight is not always a mercy, Lachesis replied. But you may feel its outline. She placed the measuring rod against the hourglass. A faint vibration moved through them both. Someone you trust will ask you to hurry. If you do, you save dignity and lose depth. Then we'll be late, Evadne said, and laughed, and the wind brought orange blossom from a sheltered court as if to say yes. The year turns without permission. The last night of the year draped the city in song. On the palace balcony, bread broke easily. Wine forgave tongue-tied toasts. The hourglass sat between them like a tame lightning. Aioné came without fanfare, more woman than goddess tonight, as if wearing mortality for the pleasure of its fit. Her beauty was devastating and familiar, like a lullaby remembered exactly. You made a holiday out of humility, she said, delighted. The cosmos approves. We borrowed shamelessly, Evadne admitted. That's what culture is, Aioné murmured, then turned serious. When the bells change, you may turn the glass for 1 minute to anchor a wish. Understand the cost. A season somewhere will come late to someone innocent. Lysander's hand froze above the glass. No, he said, throat tight. Let our wishes learn to swim without stones. Aioné's eyes warmed. Prince Charming in practice. Very rare. And you? Evadne asked. What do you wish? Aioné looked out over the harbor where masts made a forest of patience. That mortals continue to surprise us into mercy. The bells leapt. The city kissed. The hourglass stayed poised, sand stubborn, the couple's fingers twined above it like two signatures on the same promise. Walk with us into the next, Evadne said impulsively. I am the next, Aioné whispered, smiling with all the centuries. But I'll walk anyway. She linked her arm through theirs. For 60 honest seconds the goddess of the long year strolled a mortal balcony with a prince and his luminous bride, and somewhere the seasons chose to forgive a debt they hadn't been owed. Spring wakes with wet hair. Spring leaned over the city like a girl rinsing dye from her hair. Streets smelled of time and unfurling rope. The notebook of chances drew a new path. Borrowed lightning, a current that sprinted from Helioport to a cluster of islands shaped like punctuation, comma, semicolon, question mark. We'll ride it, Lysander said, shoulders easy and eyes bright. Evadne packed maps and a jar of orange peel honey for luck. Myron checked rigging and whistled a tune that made the ropes behave. Aioné appeared on the quay, a shawl the color of first leaves around her shoulders. She was gleaming, beauty like a sunrise you could walk into. Borrowed lightning runs fast and fair, until it remembers who taught it manners. Who did? Evadne asked. Old Noon, Aioné said. A king who retired from ruling clocks and keeps a court in the sky at the brightest part of day. He dislikes improvisation but admires good posture. Kairos swung from a yardarm, grinned Quicksilver. Tell him I'm thriving. Aioné smothered a laugh, then sobered. When the current forks, you'll hear two kinds of thunder, cautious and proud. Choose the pride. The cautious thunder belongs to storms that apologize after they drown you. They slipped out at dawn. Borrowed lightning took the hull like a dance partner who knew the next step and made you look better than you were. Gulls trailed them like discarded commas. By noon the sky shone with the sort of glaring purity that makes honesty easy and lies obvious. Court of the Old Noon. They climbed a stair of sunbeams to a plaza paved in luminous stone. Every shadow was clipped short and well behaved. On a throne of bright restraint sat Old Noon, beautiful and exact, his jawline as decisive as a decree. Around him, courtiers dressed in gradations of white and pale gold, each face severe but not unkind. Present yourselves, said a herald whose voice carried like polished brass. Lysander of Helioport, the prince said, bowing. Evadne of the harbor terraces. We travel under the long year's indulgence. Old Noon studied them with eyes that did not blink often. You keep strange company. My cousin Aioné likes you. This makes me curious. We have built a festival around not being ready yet, Evadne offered, unable to resist mischief in formal rooms. A ripple of disapproval moved through the bright assembly like the shadow of a cloud no one had authorized. Old Noon, however, smiled a fraction. Temerity with manners. I approve. He leaned forward. You carry an hourglass that has survived several opinions. Why? To learn what it is for, Lysander said simply. Noon hummed like a held note. Most men use time as if it were obedient furniture. Few ask its vocation. He rose. The plaza chimed. I'll grant an audience in the high arcade. Make your case. But no, at noon we do not perform mercy, we perform clarity. They followed him beneath arches that braided light into logic. There, a question waited, a door that opened onto 3 doors, each labeled with the same word, use. Choose, said Old Noon. None, Lysander replied. We won't use time. We will keep it. Like a garden, Evadne added. We will fail at it in several brave ways. Silence sharpened. Then Old Noon laughed, not loudly, but with satisfying precision. Cousin Aioné has chosen her mortals well. He pressed the seal into beeswax and gave it to them, an emblem of a sun with a keyhole at its center. Present this if anyone demands to know who allowed you to be late for a good reason. The harbor of unfinished work. Borrowed lightning delivered them to the comma-shaped island at twilight. Its little harbor was a cathedral of scaffolds. Boats stood half-painted, nets half-mended, poems half-remembered on public walls. A woman approached with a smile like a promise you actually planned to keep. Her beauty wore ink stains and salt. Her hair was black and imperfect on purpose. I'm Philomela, she said. I curate the undone. We like your holiday. Evadne lit with recognition. We stole it responsibly. Keep stealing responsibly, Philomela said. The undone needs ambassadors. She nodded at the hourglass. That looks burdensome. It hums when we lie to ourselves, Lysander said. Good instrument. She cupped it in her palms, listening. It could also sew. If you decide it is a loom. How? Evadne asked. By threading moments rather than stacking them, Philomela said. We've a pattern that gives permission. Bring home a way for fishermen to grow old with stories and not only scars. They slept on cots that knew better than to be too comfortable. At dawn, men and women came with their tools and their almosts. Evadne sketched a harbor schedule that left intentional gaps, a tide table of breath. Myron taught a mending knot that released instead of biting skin when a swell took it wrong. Lysander organized a rotation of apprentices so no one's back became an old map before 30. The hourglass purred. For once, it didn't want turning. It wanted keeping. Second duel, wagers of memory. Epiros reappeared at noon with only one shadow again, annoyed by the discipline. He strolled along the pier, admired a half-painted hull, and turned to Lysander with bored charm. Miss me? We were busy, Evadne said. So I saw, he replied, pretending not to be impressed. Let's play again. Not clocks. Memories. Wager me one you think you can live without. If I lose, I return 3 I stole from other, duller places. No, Lysander said at once. Epiros' smile thinned. You don't bargain? I do, Lysander said. But not with the foundation of my house. Evadne stepped forward. I'll wager a memory, on conditions. Lysander turned. Beloved, trust me. She faced Epiros. I'll wager the exact taste of the bread we ate the day we invented our holiday. If, when you lose, you must carry one honest memory from each person you've robbed and feel it when rain falls. The thief blinked. Something in him shifted, like a lock finding a pin. Accepted. They played at riddles of scent and sound, the first time a father's hand didn't shake while teaching a knot, the way grief creaks under a widow's second winter, the sound of walls relaxing when peace is believed for a week, then another. Evadne won, because she loved the edges of things and the edges told her secrets. Epiros staggered, then straightened, handsome and hunted. I leave 3 returns, he said hoarsely, spilling small, immaculate objects, a shell with a child's laugh, a scarf that remembered a rescue, a coin that paid for a ferry 3 years too late, and somehow still on time. And your burden? Evadne asked. When it rains, he said, voice strangled. I will learn to be kind. A shipwright of years. An old woman in a blue apron arrived with a hammer that looked like it had opinions. She was beautiful as a cliff, weathered, stern, inevitable. I'm Hestia of the dark fires, she said. I keep hearts honest in places that float. Evadne bowed. We owe you 3 repairs that held. You owe me nothing. But I've come to show you what the glass can do if you stop entertaining it and begin employing it. She set the hourglass on a trestle. Imagine a hull plank. Imagine its years. Lysander closed his eyes. He saw storms. He saw summer naps. He saw barnacles and boys learning balance. He saw old men telling stories that made salt taste sweet. No, Hestia said. Turn the glass a finger. Not to cheat the sea, but to invite the wood to remember how to flex without breaking. He did. The plank sighed like a back praised after long labor. This is keeping, Hestia said. Not stealing. If you turn it for profit, it will bite you. If you turn it for kinship, it will keep the tune. She vanished into the smell of pitch and tea. The dock fires burned with a new steadiness. The quiet siege. Word of Helioport's gentler harbors leaked across the sea. Traders came. Pirates came and discovered they lost interest halfway in. Officials came and frowned, then smiled, then pretended they had always approved. Not everyone clapped. A neighboring tyrant, King Dolan, sent letters that dripped with cordiality and threat. You delay taxes in exchange for welfare, he wrote. Delay breeds disobedience. We are teaching the sea to be survivable, Evadne replied. Survival pays. Dolan assembled ships. He planned a siege that would starve Helioport of patience. Aioné visited in twilight, beauty-weary, as if the world had been heavy all day on her back. He means to arrive 3 weeks early and demands you be ready yesterday. Can we meet him? Lysander asked. Not with swords, not yet, Aioné said. With intervals. The plan was strange. Staggered markets, overlapping festivals, work crests that hid teeth like smiling sharks. When Dolan's fleet appeared, black sails, black temper, Helioport did not harden. It elasticed. Dolan's men found no single hour to strike. Their rage arrived to an empty dock, their hunger to a street full of soup, their fear to a square where musicians played a tune whose beat kept tripping the body toward kindness. After 10 days of failing to be terrifying, Dolan sailed away with a headache. Kairos lounged on a bell tower, chewing a plum. Timing is everything, he called to the departing tyrant. You should rent some next time. The knot reveals its teeth. The end of your knot tugged. A trusted friend, Captain Myron, came to Lysander, jaw tight. The council wants us to pledge punctual tribute to Old Noon's inspectors. If we delay, we risk censure. If we hurry, we betray our people's rhythm. Who asks us to hurry? Lysander said softly, remembering the Moirai's warning. Me, Myron said, ashamed. Because I fear the shame of disapproval. Evadne set the special Hemra page on the table. Tonight delay was courage. We'll be late, Lysander said, but his voice shook. We will pay in full, and late, with a letter that teaches what we learned the hard way. They sent the letter with the sun seal Old Noon himself had given them. It explained the intervals and their harvest. It admitted clumsiness. It asked to be measured in bread and bruises saved. Inspection day came. Old Noon's envoy arrived stern as a yardstick, and smiled. We received your letter. The seal spoke well. Your math does not offend. Proceed. Laughter unknotted their chest. Myron's eyes shone with relief and apology. Lysander embraced him. Be the man who dared say what fear told you, he said. We need that man. The prince's temptation. Power accumulates like dust in drama. Admirers coined a phrase. Prince Charming time. To describe the Helioport rhythm. Merchants wanted to bottle it. Poets already had. One midnight, the hourglass warmed dangerously. The way coals grow bright when someone brings too much air too fast. A voice slid along the balcony like silk on cunning. Make it official. It purred. A figure stood in the corner. Not Aioné, not any sister of season. Something older and lazier. Kronos the accumulator. Whose beauty was the heavy kind that wins by presence, not grace. Patents, Kronos said. Decrees. Rules that make your mercy profitable. Let your name ride your city like a saddle. No, Lysander said, throat tight with the pleasure of almost agreeing. We'll write customs, not commandments. We'll let the map draw itself. Kronos smiled slowly, as if deciding to be amused. You will regret not owning what you invented. Aioné stepped beside Lysander, eyes hard. We didn't invent it. We listened. Listening can't be patented. Kronos bowed slightly, then dissolved into the dark like a lesson that would return if unlearned. The prince's temptation. Power accumulates like dust in drama. Admirers coined a phrase. Prince Charming time. To describe the Helioport rhythm. Merchants wanted to bottle it. Poets already had. One midnight, the hourglass warmed dangerously. The way coals grow bright when someone brings too much air too fast. A voice slid along the balcony like silk on cunning. Make it official. It purred. A figure stood in the corner. Not Aioné, not any sister of season. Something older and lazier. Kronos the accumulator. Whose beauty was the heavy kind that wins by presence, not grace. Patents, Kronos said. Decrees. Rules that make your mercy profitable. Let your name ride your city like a saddle. No, Lysander said, throat tight with the pleasure of almost agreeing. We'll write customs, not commandments. We'll let the map draw itself. Kronos smiled slowly, as if deciding to be amused. You will regret not owning what you invented. Aioné stepped beside Lysander, eyes hard. We didn't invent it. We listened. Listening can't be patented. Kronos bowed slightly, then dissolved into the dark like a lesson that would return if unlearned. The reckoning of the seasons. At the first orange of autumn, the Ori came walking, beauty in triplicate, fresh, fulfilled, and fading. The city hushed. You have paid and overpaid, said the middle sister, who smelled like wheat in full sun. But you keep turning a small debt into a garden. We would like to change the terms of our dealings, said the youngest spring in her laughter. No more tolls. Instead, a tithe of stories, sent yearly, to be read when the wind is wrong and mortals forget themselves. Atropus's absence had weight. Instead, a folded note lay on the fountain, the knife sister's handwriting neat, final, affectionate. I cut the cord that tied your experiment to my impatience. Tend it. Helioport shouted, wept, sang. Lysander looked up. On the wall, the hourglass hung quiet, content. Aioné appeared, face bright as a fresh ledger. You negotiated with seasons and wrote a clause that tastes like generosity. That's rare. We had good counsel, Aioné said. And a map that argues honestly. Aioné touched the hourglass lightly. I think you know what it is for now. We do, Lysander said. Not for buying perfect minutes. For making room for imperfect ones to matter. The last turn. Years passed in the way years do when they are enjoyed, quickly and in detailed fragments you can find again. Children were born and broke cups and were forgiven. Fishermen grew old and kept singing. Myron retired to teach boys how to read Thunder's handwriting. Epiros visited in rainstorms and left bread at doors anonymously. One winter morning, the hourglass hummed with a different frequency, deep, resonant, like a temple bell with no building around it. Aioné stepped into the courtyard. She was beautiful beyond metaphor, beauty that made meaning itself tilt toward her. It is time, she said. For what? Aioné asked, taking Lysander's hand. For the last turn, Aioné answered. Every hourglass I sanction receives one turn that isn't a bargain, or a bridge, or a trick. It is a gift given back, to me, to the long year, to the sea. You decide how to give it. They looked at each other, then at their city, the borrowed lightning in its streets, the festival that continued to teach new children the pleasure of not yet, the harbor that had learned to breathe. Lysander raised the glass. We turn it not for ourselves. Evadne's voice threaded his. We turn it for whoever needs a minute when no one else will lend them one. They turned it together. The sand fell like quiet rain over a thirsty field. Across the world, and just next door, a midwife's hands arrived in time. A traveler caught the last ferry. An apology was made before pride calcified. An arrow intended for cruelty landed in the sea. Aioné's eyes glittered. Kept, not used, she said softly. You learned the difference. The garden of kept time. The hourglass emptied, then refilled itself with a gentler sand, fine as flour, glowing faintly. It no longer asked to be turned. It asked to be noticed. Helioport set aside a courtyard where vines climbed patient walls and benches remembered conversations. They called it the Garden of Kept Time. No clocks were allowed, only stories, told slowly, repeated inconsistently, improved by stumbles. Kairos came to the dedication with a sprig of basil behind one ear and a grin that winked at everyone. You've built a place where I have nothing to do, he said, delighted. I can take a day off here. Nyx visited at dusk and let the first stars settle into the fountain. Hemera dropped a white scarf on a bench and said, Use it to keep chill from infants. Meridiana inscribed the lintel, late, on purpose, to arrive as yourselves. Old Noon sent a beam that warmed old bones and didn't glare. The seasons read the first packet of stories under an oak that remembered invasions and still leafed out prettily each year. Somewhere a tyrant learned to count differently and retired to a vineyard. Farewell at the harbor steps. People kept expecting tragedy because stories often demand it. But sometimes a story keeps its courage and spends it gently. Lysander's hair silvered at the temples in a way that made children trust him more. Evadne's laugh learned a new octave that only babies and gods heard. They walked the harbor at twilight and practiced saying thank you to salt. One evening Aioné met them on the steps. She was less goddess than friend, and more goddess than ever, beauty in the shape of a door always ajar. I've come to ask a last favor. Ask, they said together, because their speech had learned to braid. When sailors elsewhere call out, not with rituals, but with the kind of hope that tastes like humility, lend them a minute from your garden. Do it without being thanked. We will, Evadne promised. Aioné kissed their brows. You have made my work easier in ways the cosmos will notice slowly and then all at once. Will we see you again? Lysander asked, smiling because he knew the answer. I am what you do with again, she said, and the tide came in just then as if to illustrate recursion. The last story before lanterns. The city made a custom, before lanterns, one story. It could be long or short, but it must contain a mistake redeemed by music. Tonight Lysander stood on the fountain and told of an island that ate yesterdays and 3 beautiful sisters who collected tolls and seasons. Evadne added the bit about the orchard where you could starve beautifully. Children gasped in all the right places and 3 new metaphors were minted by teenagers within earshot. When the story ended, rain began, soft and forgiving. Epiros arrived under a hood and set down a basket of bread. He did not cry. He had learned to be kind when it rained, which meant crying wasn't the only skill available. Myron, white-bearded and widely teased, played a tune on a whistle that made the hourglass hum in sympathy. Kairos stole 2 candied figs and put them in the pockets of people who needed sweet mistakes. Meridiana checked no watches at all and beamed. The lanterns lit. The harbor breathed. The world, very briefly, kept the right time for more than one kind of heart. The prince without a throne. In old age, Lysander relinquished titles that no longer fit. Prince is a costume, he said, handing a circlet to a museum that politely refused to gild it. Keeper suits me better. He and Evadne slept often in the garden, under trees that had learned the rhythm of their voices. They argued rarely and well. When they forgot and argued poorly, They made a pilgrimage to the mirror straits and let the water show three selves, laughing at the one in cardigans. One morning, they woke to find the hourglass gone from its hook and present in every doorway as a courtesy: door, hourglass, threshold. People stepped through more tenderly, as if reminded that going from one room to another is a kind of time travel which deserves respect. Aioné sent no messages. She didn't need to. The rosemary in the courtyards grew rampant, and never resented pruning. They kept ending. There is an ending where the sea takes what it is owed. There is an ending where a storm ignores schedules. There is an ending with grand grief and statues. This is not that ending. Lysander and Aioné stood one evening at the hour the harbor turns gold, and then decides to be blue again. They held hands the way you hold a book you've read many times and still find new lines in. "We did some things wrong," Aioné said. "Correct," he said, affectionate. "We did some things late. Also correct. And some things we never finished. Those," he said, "were my favorites." They sat on the steps while the city sang. The hourglass stood on the top stair, full of soft, luminous sand that didn't fall unless someone needed it to. A child ran up and touched it. "May I borrow a minute?" the child asked. "Take two," Aioné said. "Return one," Lysander added. The child nodded gravely and sprinted away in a gust of future. The hour we kept. And so Helioport learned the old craft, not to spend time as if it were coin, not to kill it as if it were enemy, not to save it like dragons hoard gold in a cave no song can reach, but to keep it, as one keeps a garden or a promise or a friend's secret. A tall, handsome Prince Charming learned to bow to storms without making a habit of surrender. A brilliant, beautiful woman, shaped by Greek time's brightest bloodlines, taught a city to delay with courage and to arrive as themselves. The long year smiled because mortals surprised her into mercy. The seasons rewrote their bill of sale into a book of stories, read aloud when the wind is wrong. A thief carried rain kindly. Night and day loaned a lens. Noon kept them honest. If you ever pass through Helioport, look for the garden of kept time. Sit. Breathe. Let a minute land on your shoulder and decide not to fly away yet. If you have none to spare, borrow one. The hourglass is generous to the humble. Return it if you can. If you can't, tell a child the story of the island that eats yesterday and the orchard where you could starve beautifully. That counts as interest. Here, at the Mythographer, we keep telling these kinds of hours. Myths that remember their debts, heroes who learn to be late on purpose, goddesses who curate the long year and wink when you get it right. If you like this voyage, stay with us. There's always another harbor, another choice that wants a soundtrack, another minute that wants to be kept, not used.